We all love WrestleMania. Even when it's 68 hours long or angles don't quite go how we'd like, the amount of buzz that's created beforehand and the debate that goes down after is always enough to give the biggest wrestling show in the world the benefit of the doubt, because more often than not, it does live up to the billing. The key to that sentence is that I never said it always does. Even though it is a spectacle like no other, there are plenty of times WWE has aimed for the skies and instead fallen through the floor. I will always respect them for trying, but man oh man have there been some errors over the years, some of which will make you punch yourself in the face because you can't quite figure out who thought this was a good idea and who decided to greenlight it. I'm Simon from WhatCulture. This is 10 things WWE regrets about WrestleMania. Number 10, celebrity stunt shows. Let's get this straight. WWE's record with celebrities is most definitely mixed. Lawrence Taylor attacking Bam Bam Bigelow during their build-up to Mania made headlines everywhere, and we all know how essential Mike Tyson was in seeing WWE to its most successful period ever. Moments like that can't be overlooked, but when you dive a little deeper, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Big Show vs Aki Bono were not treated with the same deft touch as the Giant going against Floyd Mayweather, and Mr. T's use at WrestleMania 2 is probably better as a memory than actually watching it again. At least these were pitched as sporting competitions which could fit in with the event's overall theme, that being people trying to gain a physical advantage over their opponents. That was not the case for the many musical interludes we've seen over the years. While it always sounds great on paper, I don't think anybody has ever gone to a wrestling show wanting to see an impromptu gig. Kid Rock, Pitbull, Machine Gun Kelly, Flow Rider, they've all done their best on the Mania stage and by and large not really cut through. Fans either use it as a chance to go to the loo or get mad when they found out actual wrestlers were cut from the card to fit this in. It's not something WWE does all that regularly nowadays, which is doubly good as you can imagine how long the pay-per-view would be then. We could be pushing a legit 8 hours. Somebody please save me. Number 9, putting the belt back on Hulk Hogan. While it seems baffling today that we had a double main event at WrestleMania 9 when Hulk Hogan marched to the ring to demand a match with Yokozuna after he had cheated Bret Hart out of the WWE title and actually won, it was also a mistake. With WWE in a state of flux, Vince McMahon went against his original idea of embracing a new direction for his company and swiftly reverted to task. The Hitman was moved to one side, and fingers were crossed that the Immortal One could bring the same success he did in the 80s. That was the problem. You can never look behind you because you'll fall over, and it quickly became clear that lightning wasn't going to strike twice. This sucked even more because McMahon had sacrificed Hart to give this experiment a go. It didn't last long as Vince and Hogan bashed heads once more, meaning we reverted back to the original plan and tried to ignore all this hoopla. Thankfully, Bret had continued his workman approach throughout all of this, so the transition back wasn't a huge surprise. But you have to think WWE would do things differently now knowing what they do. I'm not even sure people were that excited at the time, aside from the sheer shock of seeing Hogan not only return to the company, but win the world title back so fast. Number 8, that Bret Hart match. Keeping on with this theme, years later at WrestleMania 26, somehow WWE was able to book Vince McMahon vs Bret Hart, a grudge match that fans had wanted to see since 1997. Just witnessing the Hitman on Raw was crazy, but to put this all together even with Hart's well-documented health issues didn't seem real. The reason for that is because our gut reactions were right. It wasn't the best idea. The main issue was that Hart couldn't bump due to everything he'd been through over the years, which meant this was just 11 minutes of Bret and the rest of the Hart Foundation beating up an old man. It was so severe it kinda babyfaced the boss, it was just too long. It makes sense that WWE would want to give the audience that night some substance, but this didn't go as intended and didn't have the heat such an anticipated clash should have. It was a classic case of wrong place and wrong time, and it's rare to hear anyone say they've gone back to watch this. Maybe here and there to see if their memories are correct, but that would probably be the end of the line. Number 7, Summer the Streak. WWE's marketing power is amazing. Some of those promo videos they play before major events can take even the most ill-advised angles and make them seem like the mega power's imploding. It has a format and all credit to them for their consistency in that regard. One of the best examples of this is everything with The Undertaker's streak. Making it seem like this was the plan the second Mark Calloway walked into the building in the 90s, it is still regarded as an utter triumph. When you go through it match by match though, not so much. For starters, no one even realised what they had until The Undertaker had beaten everybody he'd faced for around about a decade, and that is even more obvious when you go through who was standing across the other side of the ring for those exchanges. Mark Henry, The Big Show, A-Train, they weren't awful, but they certainly shouldn't be heralded as must-sees. Then of course there's the giant Gonzalez. Aside from the limitations before they'd even locked up, the finish came when Gonzalez suffocated Taker with chloroform leading to a DQ. Not really the incredible finish we'd become accustomed to, and proved that the dead man never beat all his opponents beyond reasonable doubt. You would have thought if WWE had realised what they had sooner, the quality of enemy would have increased around April of each year. Instead, we just got King Kong Bundy thrown in there. Number 6, ending the streak when they did. Look, we can argue all day about the streak and whether or not it was the right thing to do. Personally, I think it was, and in hindsight, who else was The Undertaker going to let do this? Brock Lesnar looks like he could actually kill you. It didn't hurt the Phenom one iota in terms of his credibility, and it also took Lesnar up to a whole different level. There's little doubt this helped, and he and Heyman pushed the accomplishment for years. Go back to the start of that paragraph though, and the point lies within. We can argue all day about it, and that's why a lot of people don't think that Brock Lesnar should have been the one to end the best thing about WrestleMania. In fact, they don't think it should have ended at all until Taker had nothing left to give. That's when you have a conversation about the ups and downs on pulling the trigger, and even then, maybe you don't do it at all. Survey the situation and see how you feel, especially because at WrestleMania 30, there was plenty left in the tank. That's the real kicker too. Doing it here meant Taker lost all steam when it came to the show of shows. Ever since, we've had a nothing match with Bray Wyatt, a questionable second loss against Roman Reigns, and all that madness with John Cena. Although again, personally I did like that, but yeah, it all was really bizarre. Number 5, swerves for swerves. If anyone tells you that WrestleMania 17 or X7 isn't brilliant, kick them in the shin. Well, no, don't do that. But they're being that guy, and we don't like that guy. It's a fantastic pay-per-view from start to finish, even though said finish is one that still comes under the microscope. When Stone Cold Steve Austin turned heel in his home state of Texas and then went one step further to team up with his arch nemesis, people were stunned, and not necessarily in a good way. While the highs of the Attitude Era were coming back down to earth, fans of the Rattlesnake still wanted to cheer a beer-swilling anti-hero. The character needed a kick up the ass for sure, but this isn't what the audience wanted to see. It was done, just because it could be done, a swerve for swerve's sake. Austin himself has since admitted he should have just called an audible and hit Vince McMahon with a stunner instead to end the show, and then we could have gone on as usual. We didn't do this in 2001 though, and it did hurt WWE's bottom line. It did also give us crazy paranoid Steve Austin, who is underrated, so it is a tough one, but it didn't really tie into the narrative, even if Stone Cold had told us time and time again he was going to beat The Rock by any means necessary. Maybe he should have had one exception to that rule. Number 4, the wrong main events. WWE usually wants to end a WrestleMania with the WWE or Universal title. Makes sense. That's the biggest prize they've historically had, and when Hulk Hogan was running through falls as the biggest star, the championship was enhanced because he had it. It ticked all the boxes to make sure the Hulkster had his belt, and that it was the last thing people saw. But that didn't always work for other wrestlers. For example, was Mania 13 any better with The Undertaker and Psycho Sid headlining instead of Hart and Austin? Did Triple H versus Chris Jericho top The Rock and Hogan? The answer to all is no, and that's because sometimes it is better if the world title doesn't go on last. I don't think the planet is going to explode if we change things up from time to time for the greater good. It's also apparent on the screen. Hogan vs. Rock was so amped up that the crowd could barely whisper after Triple H won the Undisputed title. Switch those two around, and it would have been far better for the audience and the wrestlers. Everyone would have been far happier deep down in their guts. Number 3, Miss WrestleMania. Santino Marella made everything he was involved in funny. That was his job, and he succeeded. This was true, although to a lesser extent, when he became Miss WrestleMania in 2009 as his fake sister Santina. In retrospect, mind, it was just a bad decision all round, even more so given the current landscape. We finally gotten to the point where we're pushing top female athletes like their male counterparts. See Charlotte, Ronda and Becky. So seeing how WWE used to go about things isn't ideal. How do you even explain it? A male wrestler won after dressing up in drag, which was clearly the case, and yet everybody involved continued to ignore this after the fact. Alright, there could have been a nuanced storyline in there too, but as ever this was played for laughs. Another blip that doesn't stand up well today. Santina could have been introduced for a few giggles without standing tall over all the women in the division, and yet we decided to go in this direction anyway. You can't get away from it either. It's right there on the network, looking at your face. Number 2, beyond questionable choices. The phrase "it was a different time" does carry some weight. You can't always judge someone from the 1950s by the same standards as today, unless of course what that person is doing is bad no matter which way you look at it. And while people were seemingly less ready to be offended in 1990 and 2003, that doesn't mean wrestling should be putting out vibes that can only be described as racist. That doesn't hold up ever. That's why seeing Roddy Piper sport blackface at WrestleMania 6 is almost impossible to watch in 2019, as is everything that happened between Triple H and Booker T 13 years later. Hearing phrases such as "people like you" and references to servants will make you want to turn off, and never allowing Booker to get his revenge is worse still. WWE wouldn't go anywhere near this stuff today, and rightfully so, hence why they probably regret it now. Using someone's race as a negative has no place in the land of reality or fiction, especially if you're going to do it as heavy-handed as this. Much like the last entry, introducing more mature issues that should be highlighted is fine, but none of the above fits into that category. It was like being hit over the head with a spade. Number 1, apparent murder. We've talked about this before, and we shall talk about it again because it is unreal. Before we do though, yes, I know that everything that happens on Raw, SmackDown and pay-per-views happens in a unique universe. No one is real, and the stories are just that. It's entertainment, and it's fair to put all ideas on the table. On that note too, other shows of a similar ilk often kill major characters off, but as WWE learned, the rules are not the same for one reason or another. This is why when The Undertaker hanged the Big Boss Man from the Hell in the Cell at WrestleMania 15, the office was flooded with complaints. Those who didn't really care were still a little confused when Boss Man returned without even suffering abuse. The only conclusion was that he must be Highlander. WWE don't talk about this now for the obvious reasons, and really knowing that kids were watching meant this wasn't the best idea. Always got to think about those things. WWE didn't, which is why nowadays it probably sends a cold chill down the spine.